Hi all, editing Rick here. I know I'm not just a disembodied voice. How strange. I've just finished the interview with Wil Wheaton that I did that you're hopefully about to watch. Only to discover that all of my audio didn't record. All of his did, so I'm able to add that perfectly fine. But if you see me sat there for long stretches just silently not saying anything without any input, that's why. It's because my audio cut off. So I'm just going to have to ask the questions in edit, post them in, and then hopefully you'll get the gist of what was happening. Cool. Technology. Hello all, Rick here with a great opportunity to chat with just a fellow geek about random nerdum and sci-fi stuff and some books. You might recognise the name, one Mr. Wil Wheaton.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, Tar. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Okay, so I'm just going to have to take a minute to not embarrass myself by being all starstruck and stuff. I'm sure that'll pass as we get into just talking nerdy things.
Listen, you're going to find out that I'm nothing worth being starstruck over, and you'll get over it very quickly, I promise.
So, I hear there's a podcast of books and tales coming up that should be live by the time this comes out.
Ah, a couple of years ago, I had an idea to take the love that I have narrating audiobooks and the satisfaction I get from creating small things that I hope will find their audience. I put them together, and we have a podcast called It's Story Time with Wil Wheaton. Once a week, new episodes every week, where I narrate a work of speculative fiction chosen from some of the great speculative fiction magazines by some of the great speculative fiction authors. Our first season features works from authors who are all across the spectrum of no one's really read a lot of your work to wow, you're an incredibly impressive and prolific creator. And my hope is that we will have we're just going to have a really good time over the next several weeks bringing new stories to an audience. Hopefully the audience that I believe exists for this is going to find it, and then we'll pick up right away and we'll do more. I will do this, I hope, for years, as long as there's an audience around that wants to hear me narrate and tell them stories.
So, is it like fair to say that creativity has been like a big part of your life? Like reading and creating worlds and looking into this
Yep.
sort of just fantasy and sci fi in general?
Yeah. Yeah, I talk about this in the first episode of the podcast. I cannot remember a time in my life when I couldn't read. My grandmother taught me how to read. Let me see if it's close enough that I can grab it. I have the book that she taught me with, and I should have it in front of me, not sitting back here on my bookshelf, but bear with me while I do this. This is the book that my grandmother taught me how to read with, Willie and the Will. I love this book.
That's pretty sweet.
Um,
I think mine was The Hungry Caterpillar.
Amazing. But you remember, right? You remember that experience of like, oh, I know what that word means. And I recognize that word on a different page. I can remember that. I have read my entire life. When I was growing up, I was allowed to stay awake as long as I wanted to, so long as I was reading. So I just read in bed until I couldn't stay awake anymore. When when I got a little bit older, I was put to work when I was 7 years old. I never wanted to be an actor. It was not my dream. It's not my passion. It was real important to my mom. My parents ended up really exploiting me and putting me to work and like really taking away a lot of the simple joys of childhood. And one of the things that I really held on to, and one of the things that was an escape and a safe place and was soothing to me was reading and losing myself in stories. I was a weird, nerdy kid. I was picked on at school. I was one of those kids on the playground who was always picked last, and just like I was sad and afraid. I loved reading science fiction where there were characters in science fiction stories who lived in a world where the things that made me weird in the real world made them very cool and really important. And I loved that. Um, I fell in love with Star Trek before Star Wars. I'll turn 53 this year, and I am dead in the middle of the Star Wars generation. Like I saw it in the theaters, um, and played with the action figures, and is enormously influential in my life. But not in the way that Star Trek was. When I was a little kid, when I was probably 5 or 6, I got one of those Star Trek records, and where you put the record on the record player, and then you could read the book with the thing. And I was captivated by that. I really enjoyed watching Star Trek after school, on, I think it's like Channel 5 here or something like that. And I began to see that all the stories I loved were in outer space, they were in the future, they were about wizards, they were all I was becoming a genre fiction fan, and I didn't know that at the time. It's just what I absolutely loved. So, storytelling has always been a really big important part of my life. I have always engaged with that type of narrative. And reading was a way for me to feel safe and to just have a break from a world that wasn't great for me at the time. Parenthetically, the world is not great for a lot of people right now. And I'm really hopeful, I am hopeful that we can provide a brief respite from that for people once a week with a new episode, just some time to get away from it, lose yourself in these beautiful stories written by these phenomenal writers, and then get back into it when it's all over. So I loved these things so much that when I was probably 10, I started writing my own stories, just making stuff up and writing them down. And they were as complex as a 10-year-old would do. Then when I was 12, I did Stand By Me. And the character I played was a writer. And people started saying to me, so are you a writer like Gordy? You should be a writer like Gordy. It just started happening all the time. And I started to feel like, well, maybe that's something that I should do. And I never lost my love for writing. I never lost my passion for storytelling, even when it wasn't really part of my job in any meaningful way. So in 2000, when I started writing my blog, that part of me that likes to tell stories, it was as if that part had been called up from minor leagues and was like, finally, put me in the game, man. And that led to me writing my blog, and that led to me writing Just a Geek. And then 20 years later, that led to me rewriting and revisiting and then publishing Still Just a Geek. And then all those short stories and little indie fiction that I've released in the interim. Um, and at some point in the last 2 decades, I just got really, really lucky, and I started working as an audiobook narrator. And people started asking me, and then they kept asking me, and then we were like trying to schedule, how can we do all of these, because they all want to work at the same time. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my god, there's this thing that I do that I love, that people like, and they want me to do more of it. As an actor, you just spend your whole life being told you're not right for this, you're not good enough for this, there's something about you we won't like, but we won't tell you what it is, go figure it out and come back. And it's maddening, and it makes you doubt yourself all the time. I am weirdly confident in my abilities to just read you a story and have fun while I do it.
It's also one of those things where if you're reading out such like an audiobook, I guess it's also enjoyable because you get to be the one reading the said book for the first time, almost.
There are moments when I am working as an audiobook narrator where I stop and just kind of marvel at that gorgeous thing that I just read, or that beautiful scene that I just had the privilege to experience. Or sometimes writers, this happens a lot with artists, this happens with comedians. When somebody does something that's great and somebody does something that's so good, you cannot respond to it the way an audience is meant to respond to it, which is like with raucous laughter, or like with incredible surge of emotion. What comes out of fellow creative people is something not dissimilar from, oh, fuck you, man, that's so good. Right? Like, how did you, god damn it, it's like a thing that happens. There is nothing better from a fellow creative person than someone being like, oh, you fucker, I can't believe you did that, it feels so good. And that happens a lot when I'm narrating. I'm reading things and it's like, oh my god, you're such a brilliant writer, I can't believe I get to be the voice of what you're doing. when Felicia and I created Tabletop, like I just loved playing board games, and I thought a really good way to share the joy of board gaming and like kind of review games is just to play them and show people, just demonstrate how fun it is. And and it worked. And I really, really hope that this thing that I am doing with this incredible creative team, we're standing on the shoulders and benefiting from the forest that was cleared by LeVar Burton when he did LeVar Burton Reads. At the beginning of this, we were talking about the business aspects of this with the team, and the business team was figuring out how. Hopefully, this becomes self-sustaining, right? Like we have a large enough Patreon audience that maybe that covers the costs and we break even, or we're able to get ads that actually like give me a bit of a paycheck. And if all of that can happen, it's going to be like that's going to be really great, and we're really excited about it. But as I was like kind of looking at getting into this, I just thought, I love this. And I know other people love this too. And I just hope that we can all sort of find each other so that people will know about this. And taking this chance and getting started with this the way that we are is a little bit of a risk, because there is only one existing podcast that ever really did what we're trying to do, and that was LeVar's podcast. LeVar is part of my space family, and he is one of my space dads, one of my space uncles. He is a person I've looked up to since I was a little kid. I was a reading rainbow kid before we worked together on Star Trek. Um, and I loved him. I loved the way that his enthusiasm mirrored my own when it came to reading. I loved his commitment to literacy and just celebrating that being bookish is cool and it's fun and all of those things we talk about when we talk about reading. So LeVar and I were on our way to a convention together, and we were sitting at the airport and just sort of catching up like you do. And I knew that I was working on this. I'd been developing it, and we hadn't yet recorded any episodes, but we'd chosen some material, and I'd worked out a lot of the foundational aspects of this podcast. But I wasn't going to do it if LeVar was like, "Dude, you're stealing my bit." So he had just wound his podcast down. His final episode had come out right around the time that we talked about this. Like it had come out like maybe that week or maybe the week before. And I said, he was like, "So what are you doing? What's new in your life?" I told him that I was working on this podcast. And I was like, "So listen, man, here's the thing. I love your podcast. I listen to it all the time. You can't see this, but if I were to turn this camera around to the mess that's on the other side of it, you would see all of my partially assembled Lego sets on the other side of this table, where I sit and build Lego while LeVar reads me stories. I fall asleep while LeVar reads me stories. I go on long road trips while LeVar reads me stories. When his podcast ended, I was like, who's going to do this for me? This is like how this is, I need this in my life. So I said, this is what I want to do. And I want to do it because I love you and I love what you taught me how to do. And I believe in speculative fiction. And I want to elevate writers who have not yet found the audience that is absolutely waiting for them to find them. Is it okay with you if I do this? And without hesitation, LeVar was like, "I love that you're doing that. I'm so excited for you to do that. Yes, here is my blessing. Please do that. Let me know if you have questions. Tell me how I can be helpful." And I was just like, "Oh my God." I I felt I felt like someone who really loves me and cares about me was supporting me and encouraging me in a way that I never got from my parents, in the way that I have made efforts to support and inspire and encourage my own kids. So I took that energy and knowing like, wow, LeVar believes in me. And I took it to work. And we did all of the work. And at one point, I was so excited. I wrote an email to the team and that said, "I just feel so good about this. I have not felt this level of excitement. I haven't felt this sense of, wow, this is cool since we started Tabletop." I feel like there's an audience waiting for this. There's a space right now in the world. And like one of the things that we compete with is not like, is it good? Yes, it's good. Do people have time for it? There's so much, right? Like I'm like, okay, tonight I am gonna finally watch Dune 2. Or I could go complete some dailies in Fallout 76 and finally get that sap tree for my camp. Like okay, well, I guess I'm gonna go play the game instead, right? You keep putting stuff off, putting stuff off. So I said, I feel like there isn't a place in the world that is doing this at the moment because Lavar's finished, and we have an opportunity to just go. We're gonna here's our version of that, and I just hope that the tens of thousands of people I've met in the last several years in an unscientific self-selecting sample have said, I just want you to know I'll listen to anything you narrate. I just hope that they find it. I hope that we can let them know that it exists.
Sounds like you're doing this, air quotes, for the right reasons to highlight like up and coming creatives and to expand and grow that
Thank
community.
you.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, I love fantasy too, and I'd love
Yeah.
to expand this channel to talk on those topics: Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, Final Fantasy lore. But it's at that stage where do I even
Yeah.
have time to do what I want alongside all this?
Yeah, of course. Right. I can relate.
So, when you're approaching sci fi or fantasy books or just like worlds in general, what is it that sort of hooks you and draws you in? What gets you immersed? Like in a sci fi setting, is it the deep, technically accurate scientific like lore that goes on? Or in a fantasy
Yeah.
setting, is it like when you
Yeah.
go to the first page and you just see a world map there? Or is it the annals of deep texts and fantasy history?
Uh, I see that you are a fellow map enthusiast. It's one of my favorite things, man. I would go to the game shop and I would go straight to the RPG section and I would just go looking for maps. I loved it. I loved it so much. When we did Titan's Grave for Geek and Sundry, getting the map of our world built was a huge deal for me. We hired a wonderful cartographer and I was like, these are the things that I absolutely want on this map. Everything else is up to you. Just have fun. And we got a great thing. So I believe that there's something that happens when we empower other creative people to do their creating to the best of their ability, unencumbered by our like little meddling, right? When I hire someone, I always tell them in not in so many words, I I asked you to work with me because I love and respect what you do, and you're better at that than I will ever be. So I'm going to give you ideas and notes, but I'm really going to get out of the way so that you can do your thing. It's the way I like. I want people to get out of their way and let me do my thing. I don't need someone standing over me, second guessing every choice that I make. So I was able to bring together people who really fit with that, and then set them off and bring them back. You asked me about how I like technology levels and things like that. And the thing that immediately came to my mind was when I was 14, I read Ringworld for the first time. And the narrative, the character narrative of Ringworld for me is a little thin. Um, but the storytelling and the world building and the different species and the way that opened up me reading Tales of Known Space and other things that Niven and Purnell did together, the idea that there was this ring world, that this was a thing that could exist, fascinated me. And the scale of it blew my mind, and I was captivated by it. And that was my first experience with caring about the technology level of the thing that I was reading. Shortly after I read that, I read The Forever War. And that was the first time the science associated with time travel and time compression and dilation and that level of physics was so fundamental to the story the, that someone would that you could fall in love with a person and know that when they came back it was going to be a few months for them and your entire life was fascinating and super compelling to me. And when I read that, I didn't really understand the comparisons to the Vietnam War and then the ridiculous never-ending occupation in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that really, really landed on me. But the thing that has always mattered to me more than anything are the characters. I have connected to strong characters who have a clear point of view, who have allies they can rely on, a thing I've always wanted in my life, just people who I know are always going to be there for me, who, as I said, have these things in them that I have in me that make me weird, but it makes them cool and useful in their world. Those were the things that I really, really cared about. And that was the stuff that I just couldn't stop. The fantasy novels that really pulled me into fantasy and moved me out of fantasy enthusiast to like mega fantasy weirdo were the Dragonlance books. I read look, I read The Hobbit when I was in 6th or 7th grade. I didn't read the songs, but I enjoyed it. I loved the Rankin Bass cartoon. I loved all of that. I had read the Lord of the Rings trilogy and liked it. I thought it was great, but it didn't land on me the way that like playing D&D did. It was just so big, and some of, for a kid, that a lot of the language was complicated, and like after you get to that third book and it's like, wow, it's still going. But it was Dragonlance. And then, I mean, how even many of the R.A. Salvatore books just, and it was just like, oh yeah, I love this. I really, really love this. Um,
If I keep glancing off camera, it's because I'm looking at my own shelf of lore books over there.
and then the Lone Wolf series, the fighting fantasy books, were another huge influence on me. I loved Choose Your Own Adventure. I used to do a live stream at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I was doing a live stream every Monday night where I'd read Choose Your Own Adventure books live on Twitch and let the audience decide what the choices were. It was really, really fun. And I may do it again because it's a good way to build audience, but it was so much fun to do. um, when the Lone Wolf books came out and the Fighting Fantasy books came out, that marriage of narrative, reading a narrative and playing a game where the book was my dungeon master, was also very influential for me. These were all things that just supported my imagination and really encouraged me to just follow these incredibly interesting stories wherever they went. And I always felt empowered by them.
My stories into the whole D&D expanded like lore and stuff, they all came from the R.A. Salvatore books, following Dritz, Stoerden and things like that. Yeah, I completely agree, especially when you're talking about like, it's definitely the
Yeah.
characters and characterization that draws you into an immersive fantasy world like that. Whether that's sci-fi or fantasy, you find them together on the same bookshelf in bookshops, but they each got their own flair. But it's characters that bring it all together. You know, lore and all this background history is nothing without people to actively experience it. It's why the Mass Effect series is my favourite gaming series.
Hmm.
So building worlds and helping flesh them out and create them seems to have always been something that's like important and has always been wrapped up in what you do. Where you've also been like creating your own visions as an author, also helping to embody someone else's, helping to bring something that they've created to life.
I'm on a writing I'm on a writing deadline right now. I'm contributing to a friend's project, and I I got an email that very gently asked, like, "So were you going to make the deadline that was 2 weeks ago?" And I was like, "Wait, what? It's not until next month." Oh, I wrote it down wrong. Okay. And I was like, all right, I'm sorry. Let me get to work. I'll have this for you as soon as I can. And I went to work. And I had months ago, I had outlined roughly what I wanted to do, and I wrote down a whole bunch of ideas for this thing, and they were terrific. And I pulled it out. I was like, cool. All I got to do is just clean this up. And I looked at it and realized, oh, what I have here are a lot of ideas and absolutely no character. I have no point of view. I have no arc. I don't know who is telling the story and why. And I spent so many days taking walk after walk after walk, working that out, talking through things, writing things down, throwing them away and coming back to it. And finally, I found the character. And I I got to know the narrative character, and I learned why he is talking about these things, and why he cares about all these ideas that are cool ideas that I had that just didn't make a story. And when that came together, I knew what to do. Yesterday, I started writing at like 10:30 in the morning, and it was like 6 o'clock at night when I looked up and realized the entire day had gone by and I was hungry. And it was because I had found the character, and now I was just listening to that character talk, and I was just doing my best to keep up with him and get his whole story out. And the next step is to go through that and then start to add pieces of him walking around the room while he talks about it, and maybe he's eating something, or just to add to fill out that scene. But the ideas meant nothing without the actual character. And it was a good lesson for me, that I had essentially just written a ton of lore, which is fun. I love writing lore. I have this bookshelf behind me extends way down the wall, and there are two shelves that are nothing but RPG books I will never play, that I bought exclusively to read the lore and steal the lore for my own campaigns.
That's not something I would
And
do. I've never done that at all for my campaigns. Not never.
Yeah, right. I had a fun conversation with a guy on Reddit yesterday where we were talking about Shadowrun, the worst rules that have ever been written in an RPG. They're just terrible. They're like, they don't want you to have fun. And the lore in that setting is amazing. Just the most incredible lore I've ever read. And it was my introduction to, you can read these books if you're not going to play them. That's fine. And I don't know why I needed that weird permission, but that I was like, oh, okay. Yes, I will go buy every GURP source book I can get my hands on. I'm never going to play them, but I'm going to use, I love that lore. And there's ideas in there, and there are character archetypes and outlines in there. I learned a long time ago that there is no such thing as a creator or an author who invents everything out of the ether. You just pluck an idea and it's there. Everything that I do is in one way or another, on a spectrum of inspired by to stolen from someone whose work I really, really love.
Yeah, a lot of it's, like I say, it's all been done before, but hopefully you can take different things that have been done before and mix them together to make something totally
Mhm.
new. So, I've got a very nerdy and hopefully creative question to put to
All
you.
right. Yep.
If you were given complete control of Star Trek, all of it, complete creative control to make whatever you like, to
hmm
do whatever you like, what series would
hmm
you create? Something, themes or ideas, if you had complete say, what would you make?
I would love to see a lot of the Star Trek stories we know told from the point of view of the Klingon Empire, the Bajorans. I would love an anthology series that tells you different stories with different casts in different locations that show us what life is like in the Star Trek world for people who are not necessarily members of Starfleet. So what they did with short treks is exactly what I would want to do with a full Star Trek series. These are little stories that are not focused on characters we know, that are not even set on starships that we're familiar with or star bases we know, right? They're just other places in this world, and we see how the people who live there are affected by the world that Star Trek teaches us is possible and teaches us we need to build, and that we can strive for. I just narrated John Scalzi's book When the Moon Hits Your Eye. It is a hilarious book. It is in the same style as Starter Villain and Red Shirts. And Kaiju Preservation Society, all of which I had the privilege of narrating, all of which I absolutely love. And the When the Moon Hits Your Eye is about when the moon literally turns into cheese. And it's such a ridiculous premise, but John worked out the science. what would happen? What needs to happen for this to exist? Okay, we've done the math. This is what needs to happen for this to exist. Now, what happens when that math is operative? Well, it's different wherever you are on the planet. And the moon is something that everyone who lives on the earth experiences in one way or another. So this book has a small number of narrative characters so that we have a clear idea of like, these are people who are working on the problem.
It would be a
But the
problem.
majority of this book is regular people in their everyday lives living on a planet where the moon has turned into cheese. What is that about? I would love a Star Trek series that shows us the different people that we interact with when we go on away missions, but then now we take the A stories and B stories and we flip them. And the A stories become from their point of view, what it is about. What's it like when Starfleet comes to your planet for the very first time and makes first contact? What do you do with that? I would love to explore things sort of like that. Mike McMahon said that the stories in Lower Decks, which is my favorite Star Trek series after Deep Space Nine, he said that the stories that would be the B story in Next Generation are the A story in Lower Decks. So I would love to elevate B stories and just see what other people are doing and how the choices made by Starfleet, made by the captains, made by Starfleet Command, how they actually ripple out and affect people in unexpected ways, and what Starfleet does when those consequences come back better or worse than they anticipated.
That's a really interesting answer. Like I was expecting a specified like this place or this time or these themes, but you've kind of gone for an all-encompassing all of the above.
So you assemble a writer's room, right? And you have, I don't know, let's say you have 8 people in the writer's room and you're going to do 20 episodes. Every one of them gets to do that thing that they always wondered about, right? One of the really great things I learned when I was hosting Ready Room is that everyone who works on Star Trek today, all of the writers, all of the department heads, everyone who designs all of the things you see, and 70% of the actors are lifelong Star Trek fans. So the people writing Star Trek right now are essentially writing fan fiction and getting paid for it and making it canon. They're doing the exact same thing that they were doing before they were hired. And I love that. I want to see what happens when you bring people together who have thought about this their whole lives, who care about this, who have read books and seen movies and had those wonderful nerd arguments that we just relish at midnight in the lobby at a convention. And they've got stories that they want to tell. I would love to experience those stories. And listen, to bring it back to the podcast, if someone writes a story like that and they want to make it similar yet legally distinctly different from an existing property, pitch us. We'd love to see it. My dream with my podcast is that we, a year from now, 2 years from now, are breaking brand new authors, people that have done Clarion, people that have gone to grad school, who have done different workshops, people who were just enthusiastic, independent writers who have never thought anyone else wants to read what they write. There is right now in the world the next unbelievable creator. The next George R. R. Martin is just sitting out there waiting for someone to say, I'd love to read what you've written. We're going to be that. In our first season, we're using work that has been approved from really wonderful writers. We have writers here who have never been published before, all the way to writers who have won Hugos and Nebulas and other like really respectable accolades from their peer group. And there's a lot of writers here who, as far as I can tell, don't really have the mainstream visibility that I think is waiting for them. And I'm just hopeful that in the way that I straddle kind of two worlds, I've got one foot firmly and proudly and comfortably planted in the sci-fi and genre world, and I've got another foot that is like trying not to step on the flowers in kind of like a normie world because of all the work that I did on the Big Bang Theory and all the network television work that I've done. The audiobooks that I read, the people that buy them are not solely Star Trek fans and solely science fiction fans. I narrate a wide genre of an incredibly diverse genre of books. From I just did Bill Gates' first memoir, which I treated the way I treated my memoir, which was to read it as if I am that character and I am telling you my story and I am feeling the things that he felt as he was recalling these things, rather than doing kind of like a dry dissertation that's like a speech you would hear when someone's giving a commencement address or something like that. And I've done work that is incredibly wildly speculative. I did a story for Toby Backel about a machine that tears up the ground in front of it and builds a road behind it, and it's powered by this weird kind of Baron Harkonnen looking guy that like is melded into the machine, and it was so different and weird. I've had this incredible privilege to do all this creative work that crosses genre and demos and audiences, and they all tell me that they like the way that I read to them and they like the way that I tell them stories and they want more of that. So here you go. We did this for you. Please tell your friends and please smash that subscribe button and like us hard, rate and review, because if we can find the audience that I think is there that is going to really enjoy this, then we can just do more. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that we can do more. If we can't do more, I'm really proud of what we did. I had a really good time with it, and it was really fun. It's been such a privilege and a pleasure to work on this and to experience these authors and their stories and their writing styles. Um, and Sorry about that. I'll finish my thought, and then I guess it's Zoom's way of telling us we're done.
Yeah, sorry about that, but you found my wrap up segue, so please continue.
Um, so as I was saying before Zoom decided they didn't want to hear my bullshit anymore, John Rogers said that you want to leave every season, like you want to finish every season so that in a way that if you never get to do it again, you know that you did it and you put it there, and anyone can take this from now until the heat death of the universe and see the thing that we made, and it has a wonderful ending that we feel good about. This is a series of stories that are all different. The only thing they have in common is I love them and I'm narrating them. And I feel really good about what we did. I I hope that the audience likes it the way that we like it. But if they don't, and we can't hit the numbers that we want to hit, I feel really good about what we did, and I really love it. And I hope that 6 months from now, I'm like, I can't believe I thought that there was a chance this wouldn't work. I don't know.
Well, I guess the only way to know is if you, dear viewer, go over and check out the podcast. Where can people find It's Storytime with Wil Wheaton?
You can find It's Storytime with Wil Wheaton everywhere you get your podcasts. So whatever is easiest for you, just search for it. You can search for my name. You can search for It's Storytime. You will find it and you can subscribe it there. It will really, really help us if you rate and review us, and tell people about it. Like that's just, that's what we're kind of counting on. We're counting on y'all getting excited and helping us let other people know about it. You can find out more about it at wilwheaton.net, which is my blog. There will always be a link to the newest episode there. And we have a Patreon for people who want to support the show that way. There will be more information about that in the podcast. You and I are recording this a little bit before that work has actually been completed. So I don't know exactly what the address is, but we will have that community coming up as well. And there will be more information on that at my blog. So you can find the podcast everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you just want some more information or you have questions about it, you can come to wilwheaton.net and you can find a way to reach me directly. And you can also find links to the podcast there.
Thank you for agreeing to this rather informal chat. I'm glad I got the chance to nerd out with you about made up stuff.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, it's not very different than what I would do with any of my friends if given the opportunity. So